Moving on to the last topic of today, inversions. We now know that all triads are built with 3 notes stacked in thirds as shown in the root position chord here. Given that we are in C major, this is a chord 5A with the notes G, B, D. The G is the root of the chord, the B is the third of the chord, and the D is the fifth of the chord. If the lowest note is the root itself, that is the note that we built the thirds upon, we say that the chord is in its root position. For all chords, this is not always the case. The third or the fifth of any chord can be played as the lowest note in the chord. This does not change the root, it only changes the bass. We can still figure out which note is the root by rearranging the 3 notes in a pair of thirds. If, for example, we displace the position of the root by inverting it an octave higher, the third of the chord, or the B note, is now the lowest sounding note. We say that the chord is now in its first inversion, or chord 5B. You can see that the 3 notes remain the same pitches, G, B, D, only that they are arranged in a way that we first have an interval of a third between B and D, followed by a fourth between D and G. That is why we know that it is not in the root position, because if we have a root position chord, we should have a pair of thirds. The chord now is in the first inversion. If we rearrange the chord again in a way that the fifth of the chord is at the base, the chord is now in its second inversion as chord 5C. We now have a fourth between D and G and a third between G and B. In other words, if the lowest note is the fifth of the chord, we have a second inversion chord. It is important that candidates do not confuse the root as the bass note. To find the root of any triad, always rearrange them in a way that they are stacked in thirds, not any other intervals. Here, for example, G to B are a third apart, and B to D are also a third apart. So we have a pair of thirds. If they are in this arrangement, then we can identify the G note as the root. If the G note is also the bass, then the chord is in root position, 5A. If the third of the chord, or the B note, is at the base, it is then inverted to the first inversion, 5B. If the fifth of the chord, the D note, is at the base, the chord is now in the second inversion, chord 5C. With that in mind, we can now combine our knowledge of keys, chords, and inversions to correctly indicate a chord and its inversion. We have here a chord in the key of A minor. The 3 notes are E, A, and C. To find out what chord it is, we first need to ask if the 3 notes are arranged in thirds or not. The answer is no. E to A are a fourth apart. So how can we rearrange them into a pair of thirds? We can arrange them into A, C, and E. We see that A to C is a third apart, while C to E is likewise a third apart. Now that we have arranged it in its triadic form, we also see that the root is A. So in the key of A minor, the chord here is a tonic chord, or chord 1. Now we aren't quite done yet, as we still have to indicate the inversion. Based on the 3 notes here, if the bass is A, it is in the root position. If the bass is C, the chord is in the first inversion. If the bass is an E, the chord is in its second inversion. So which note is at the base? The answer is E. Therefore, we say that this is a chord 1C. Let me walk you through on another one. We now have a chord with the notes A, C, and F in the key of C major. Are the three notes arranged in thirds? No, because C to F is a fourth apart. So how can we arrange them into a pair of thirds? There, that's better. Since the notes are arranged in their triadic form, we know that F is the root of the chord. So this is called 4, as F note is the subdominant note of C major. To find the inversion, we need to see which note is at the base. The base of the chord is the A note. So the chord is called for B in the first inversion. On to another one. Now we have D, F, and B in the key of A minor. The notes are not arranged in thirds, as F to B forms a fourth. Once arranged to this form, we know that the B note is the root. B is the supertonic note in the key of A minor, so this is a chord 2. As for the inversion, we need to find out which note is at the base. The D note is at the base, so we have a chord 2B. Last example here, we have B, E, and G sharp in the key of A minor. Are the notes arranged in a pair of thirds? No, because B to E forms a fourth. Once rearranged as E, G sharp, and B, we know that the E is the root, so this is a chord 5. To locate the inversion, identify that the note at the base is a B note, so this is a chord 5C. Before we end today's session, let's have a look at a sample exam question. We are asked to name the chords by ticking the right boxes that describe the chords and positions. The key given to us is in E minor, and we have 3 chords to name. Pause the video and try it out now. Here are the answers. The first chord is chord 1C. We have the notes B, G, B, and E. Arranged in pairs of thirds, we have E, G, and B. So it is chord 1. For the inversion, since the fifth of the chord, the B note, is at the base, the chord is in the second inversion. So we have chord 1C. The second chord is chord 4B. We have the notes C, E, A, and E. Rearranged in pairs of thirds, we have A, C, and E. The note A is the root and the subdominant, so this is chord 4. For the inversion, since the third or the C note is at the base, we have chord 4B. For the third chord, the answer is 5A. With the notes B, D sharp, and F sharp, this chord is already arranged in pairs of thirds, so the root of the chord is also the base of the chord. The B note is the dominant, so we have a chord 5A. One more sample question in the key of A major. Pause and try it out now. Here are the answers. I hope you can get all of them right without any explanations needed. If not, please revise on the topic of inversions once more. However, if the previous exercise was easy for you, then congratulations, you are ready to move on to the next topic.